Starting off this countdown, we have St. Elmo. St. Elmo, originally known as Forest City, was once a very popular mining town in Colorado. They had about 2,000 people living there when the mines opened. However, in the early 1920s, the mining industry started to decline, and slowly people packed up and left. However, it's not completely abandoned. Apparently, a couple of people still live there, but it's said that this place is haunted. In fact, it's said that it is home to some of the most paranormal activity in the state. Maybe it's a good spot for paranormal investigators, but not the best area to live in. I mean, I wouldn't want ghosts for neighbors. I mean, maybe I would, if they were friendly ghosts that kept noise levels down, then sure. Moving on at number 9, we have Cracow, Italy. Cracow, Italy was founded in the 8th century. However, it now lays abandoned due to a series of destructive natural disasters. The first natural disaster occurred in 1963 when a bunch of landslides affected the area. This was a result of the city being built on a cliff 1,300 feet off of the ground, and they also had some sewer and water system issues. Then in 1972, a flood struck the area and made the whole situation worse. Then in 1980, there was an earthquake that left the city completely abandoned. Now, the only people you may catch there are film crews. It's a very popular filming location. Some scenes in the film Quantum of Solace were shot there. But the area itself is considered a ticking time bomb, and it's surrounded by a locked gate. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have the city underwater. You aren't going to be able to visit this next city unless you have access to scuba diving gear, because this city is now completely submerged underwater. Built 1,300 years ago, the city I'm referring to is Xichang, also referred to as Lion City, and it's located in eastern China. In 1959, the city was purposely flooded to build a hydroelectric power station. Now it's referred to as China's Atlantis. What's pretty fascinating is that although it lays about 40 meters underwater, the buildings are still in pretty good shape. The only change is instead of having human residents, it's home to tons of aquatic life. Moving on to number 7, we have Cahaba, Alabama. Cahaba in Alabama was abandoned after suffering from seasonal flooding. In 1865, Cahaba was destroyed by a flood and then abandoned. After the flood, living there became relatively impossible, so residents had no choice but to leave. But then in the 1920s, an archaeologist started to uncover and preserve some of the structures. Now it's said that the area is very haunted. In fact, it's known for a ghostly orb that can be seen floating around only to vanish into thin air. So the citizens may no longer live there, but ghosts certainly do. In our 6th spot, we have Varsha Cyprus. In the early 70s, Varsha was one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. That was until 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus. As a result, the residents there fled for their lives. Some residents have told stories of pots being left on their stoves or things still left in their ovens. It's quite sad how they were forced out of their own home and not allowed to return. Since 1974, Varsha has been abandoned and under control of the Turkish military. The whole area is now fenced off and under constant supervision. If you try to break in, well, the army patrols have orders to shoot on sight. So don't even try to visit the city, it definitely will end badly. It's just such a shame because the area is beautiful. In fact, actress Elizabeth Taylor loved going there. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Plymouth Montserrat. Plymouth, once the capital of Montserrat in the Caribbean, is often referred to as Pompeii of the Caribbean. Why? Well, in 1996, a volcano erupted, causing a mass evacuation. A few months later, some residents returned, but were welcomed with another eruption. On June 25, 1997, this eruption killed 19 residents and destroyed the island's airport, trapping many others from fleeing. Eventually, Plymouth was evacuated again, but this time, no one dared to return. Everything was destroyed. In fact, 80% of the town is currently covered in ash. Pictures show homes completely buried with only their roofs sticking out. It's quite sad and scary. Moving on to number 4, we have Centralia. Centralia is an abandoned town located in Pennsylvania. It was once a populated town, however, a lot of residents were forced to leave due to unsafe living conditions. This all started after a coal fire ignited underground. This fire has been burning for almost 50 years, and it's predicted to continue on for another 200 years. As a result of this fire, tons of sinkholes have formed, hot smoke is released underground, and carbon monoxide has filled some residents' basements. In some parts of the town, it's said that the ground beneath them have reached up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 400 degrees Celsius for us Canadians. Now, the US government is trying to erase any history of this city. They took away any signs directing people to this town, removed the town's zip code, and forced most of the residents out, except for 7 residents that are happy living in their deadly town and refuse to move out. In our third spot, we have the Island of Dolls, aka the island I never want to visit. Located in Mexico City, the Island of Dolls is full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings. If that's not bad enough, these dolls have been there for so long that they are covered in dirt, cobwebs, and insects, making them look that much more terrifying. Now, you're probably wondering how this place came to be. Clearly, it's not Annabelle or Chucky's private island resort, though it could be. So back in the 1950s, a man named Don Julian started to hang dolls from trees as a way to protect himself against evil spirits. Paranormal things kept happening to him there, so he would hang dolls everywhere with the idea that they would scare the souls of the deceased. He spent more than 50 years hanging dolls. Some were found in the garbage, some were missing limbs. Did not matter. If it was a doll, it got hung up all around the island. Now it's abandoned and looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Coming in at number 2, we have Woden, Australia. Located northeast of Perth, Australia, Woden is considered one of Australia's deadliest towns. And you would think it would have to do with Australia's massive and deadly insects, but surprisingly not. In fact, it's because of its blue asbestos. In 1937, blue asbestos was discovered in the city's gorge. Years later, miners were unearthing tons of asbestos from the ground. It wasn't until 1978 that the government started pushing people out of their homes. They realized how deadly it was for them to be living there. It was increasing their risk for cancer. And in some cases, people were already developing lung cancer just from living there. It would cost the town about $2.43 million to rid the town of asbestos. So instead of doing that, they just shut the town down completely. In 2006, the government turned off the power to the town and had its name removed from maps and road signs. In fact, all roads that once led to the town are now closed off. If you do choose to enter the town, you will find tons of huge warning signs advising you to turn back. And in our number 1 spot, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. This is probably the most famous abandoned city on the list. So Pripyat was a city in Ukraine that had a population of 49,000 individuals. However, on April 27, 1986, all residents were forced to evacuate following the Chernobyl disaster. Pripyat was the most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster since they were the closest to the power plant. They were the ones most exposed to the radioactive chemicals. A once beautiful city was left abandoned in just 3 hours. Due to the radiation, the city will be left untouched for thousands of more years until it's safe enough to return.
Starting us off at number 10 are Wichita Falls, Texas. And surprisingly, there are a lot of haunted towns in the state of Texas. There are a lot on this list, and I feel like they probably make the record for most haunted towns in America. But either way, Wichita Falls is filled, and I mean filled, with haunting stories. There's a site in town called the Witch's Gate that used to be a mansion before it burned down in the 70s. After the man of the house died, his wife went a bit insane, turning to things like witchcraft to try and cope. She somehow burned the mansion down, killing her 2 sons with it. Another story claims the sons were robbed and it was the thief that set the house on fire. The boys haunt the area till this day, and I'm not surprised, I'd be pissed too. Another famous one is the White Sanitarium. Presently a private residence, it used to be a mental hospital in the 20s. After the place closed down, people people have seen a group of men sitting around a table playing cards, perhaps the hospital's dead old staff, I don't know, but more famously they've seen a woman in nurse's clothes roaming the building. There's also Pinky's Cave, which is a 3-mile drainage ditch, and kids used to hang out there years ago, but now it's filled with eerie sounds and homeless people, as well as the ghost of a woman and her child who drowned inside the tunnel during a storm. Coming in at number 9 is Pluckley, Kent. Pluckley is a small village in Kent that was named the most haunted village in England by Guinness World Records in 1989. So I don't want to overhype it, but at the same time it clearly deserves the hype. It's said that 12 to 16 ghosts haunt the village and the surrounding areas. The list includes a screaming man who worked at the village brickworks and fell to his death. Another is a highwayman who was pinned to a tree with a sword. That tree was soon named Fright Corner, and that's where his ghost looms every day. The watercress woman is the ghost of a woman who used to sit on a bridge drinking gin and smoking her pipe while selling watercress. You'd assume she drowned in the river she sat near, but the reality was a lot more grim. It's said she dropped gin all over herself and accidentally set herself alight on the bridge. There's also the ghost of a principal who hung himself and was found by his students. On LV Farm, which dates back to 1406, there's the ghost of Edward Brett who shot himself in the dairy. His last words to his wife were, "I will do it," and that's what can be heard whispered around the farm. Then of course, if we're more generic, there's the white lady and the red lady, because make no mistake, there is always a white lady ghost in every list. That's 7 ghosts already, and that's not even the end of it. Based on the deaths in the list, I get the feeling there's like an external force in the village that made people slightly suicidal. That's the vibe I'm getting, I don't really know. At number 8 we have Savannah, Georgia. Apparently it's widespread knowledge that Savannah is the most haunted city in America, and thankfully I've never been. The town was given this title because literally every building in the town is haunted, like everyone. Every building has a story, every building has its own ghost. It's like Savannah is more for the ghosts than it is for the living. The Hamilton Turner Inn is home to the ghost of a man smoking a cigar on its roof, as well as little children. Whose children are they? God knows. Dubbed one of the best haunted hotels in the US because clearly that's a real category, the Marshall House was a hotel that ended up being used as a hospital thrice in its history, and thus you can imagine all the dead patients as ghosts running around. 1790 Inn and Restaurant is the home of a scorned woman called Anna who haunts the upstairs guest rooms waiting for her lost love. But why is Savannah so haunted? Let's go back in history. The town has been the site of many atrocities. The siege of Savannah that killed 240 people left people thinking unsettled soldiers still lingered there. Savannah has also been the site of a yellow fever epidemic, so that's a lot of people dead just there. In 1820 there was a massive fire in town that destroyed 500 buildings, and there was an even bigger fire 25 years prior that destroyed half that number. The people that died in those fires have been linked to the houses they occupied. And let's not forget the countless murders that have taken place there as well. Filling our number 7 slot is Jerome, Arizona. Mining town Jerome is known as the wickedest town in the West for its brothels, gambling, and heavy drinking miners. The town itself actually burned down 3 times in 3 years at the end of the 1800s. At its peak, its population was 15,000, it then shrank to 50 people in the 50s, and currently it's 450 people. Inside the town, the Jerome Grand Hotel adds to the hauntings tenfold. Before it was a hotel, it was the United Verde Hospital where dozens of people died during the Great Spanish Influenza. Coughs, breathing, lights flicking, doors opening, a little child running on the 3rd floor either laughing or crying, it has it all. Sometimes the little ghost just stays at the foot of a guest's bed and stares at them all night. The sounds of newborn babies crying, and many guests have even spoken to the front desk about it out of concern, but then they find out it's coming from an empty room. A maintenance man named Claude Harvey was found under the elevator murdered in the 30s, and his ghost wanders around the hotel as well. There's even a ghost cat at this hotel. Can you imagine? I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Other than coming for tourism or to chase ghosts, no one really visits Jerome anymore, sadly. Now at number 6 is Helltown, Ohio. Founded in 1806 and formerly called Boston, this place used to be the oldest village in Summit County. Helltown was the victim of disappearing forest land when President Ford let the National Park jurisdiction expropriate land to make parks. The NPS started buying properties of locals in Helltown, and they were pissed. ghost. They even wrote "Now we know how the Indians felt" all over their houses, which I feel is a bit inappropriate, but either way, that was all for nothing. The plan fell through in the end and the village was abandoned. Things went wrong in 1985 when rangers visited Cracow dump nearby and left covered in rashes and sick. Apparently the dump was highly toxic because chemicals were never disposed of properly. There's also the issue of the Satanist church, equipped with upside down crosses and all. Human and animal sacrifices even took place there, and that's not all. There was even an escaped mental patient in the woods in the town that killed a bus full of children, and that bus is still there, haunted by the ghost's murdered past. There's even a mutated snake in the town known as the Peninsula Python, so it's safe to say the town lives up to its name and has way too much going on. Coming in at number 5 is Granbury, Texas. This one's a bit of a small one. In 2010 their population wasn't even 8,000, so I mean it's an intimate little town. But regardless of that, it's been the home for many infamous people over the years. Davy Crockett's wife Elizabeth moved there post the Texas Revolution, and Jesse James is even buried in the city of Granbury Cemetery. Billy the Kid apparently moved there too after faking his own death. But the biggest haunted appeal of Granbury is John St. Helen. He moved there in the 1870s to teach and would quote Shakespeare all the time. But people think John St. Helen was actually John Wilkes Booth, the man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Apparently he died in a bar fire and police threw Booth's body into the Potomac River. Others say he was assigned a new identity after the assassination. I mean, in town he walked with a strange limp and had a southern accent, so people were wary of him. On his deathbed he did confess to a priest that he was in fact John Wilkes Booth and told him where he could find the gun that killed Abe. But he didn't die that day. He fled the city, but it's said that when he did finally die wherever that was, he came back to Granbury. The Granbury Opera House is haunted by him now, and you can hear him quoting Shakespeare all the time. Some things never change. At number 4 is Galveston, Texas. This island city's residents are so used to seeing ghosts around that honestly, they don't even bat an eyelid anymore. During the early 1900s, the city opened the Galvez Hotel to honor military leader Bernardo de Galvez, and they commissioned a giant portrait of him to go in its lobby. Soon after the Galvez Hotel opened its doors, guests started complaining this painting would make them feel extremely cold and that his eyes would just follow them everywhere. The hotel is also haunted by a ghost bride who's been seen many times in room 501. It's said she hung herself after finding out her fiancé died at sea, but to make matters worse, he didn't even die. He came to the hotel looking for her and for the marriage that would never be. There was also a storm in 1900 which is still considered the deadliest storm in US history that killed 8,000 residents. Mayfield Manor served as a morgue after the storm, and it's now haunted all year round, 24/7, around the clock. Dash Beardsley does ghost tours of the city, and he said he's seen them with his own eyes. Among his many stories is one of an office in town that calls 911 every night. The police have gone there countless times to find the office empty and no telephone even connected. Another story is the ghost of a salesman who died inside Madame Harvey's brothel in the 1800s. A police chief moved his body to a park and made it look like he was, feeding pigeons, and put him on a bench so it would be less embarrassing for his family, and the man's ghost is still looking for his car keys. Filling our number 3 slot is Jefferson, Texas. That's 3 towns in Texas in a row now. I really wasn't lying when I said Texas takes the cake on this list. It's been dubbed one of the most haunted towns in the South by many travel channels, and I know it sounds like I'm saying this is one of the most haunted towns ever for every single number, but it's true. Either way, the town is plagued by the apparitions haunting the Jefferson Hotel and the Excelsior House. Let's start with the hotel. There's a staircase inside which is known to be haunted by a little ghost that likes pulling hair and tapping guests' shoulders. Guests have been locked inside their hotel rooms and bathrooms for ages before being let out, whilst hearing a creepy laughter from the other side of the door. Orbs also appear in photos taken inside the hotel, and all this isn't even scaring me, it's just making me feel annoyed for the guests who have to stay there. Not my problem. Not my problem. Anyway, the Excelsior House is another hotel that's basically just as haunted. It houses a headless ghost on the 2nd floor, so might want to avoid that. And it even houses a woman in black carrying a baby. The ghost apparently even spoke to Steven Spielberg in the 80s, and so she got closer to my dreams of becoming an actor than I have, and she's dead. Great. Now at number 2 is Kerrville, Texas. This town is specifically known for 2 haunted buildings whose ghosts seem to go all around the town all the time. The first is Kerr County Courthouse, where 2 tragedies took place. The first was to do with a couple. The man asked his beloved to marry him and she said no, so naturally in a fit of jealousy and rage he killed her and then hung himself right in front of the courthouse. Talk about unable to deal with rejection. Man up, boy. Both have been seen over 100 times at the courthouse and the surrounding area, just milling about. Honestly, I'd be so mad if I was the girl, honestly. Like I said, I didn't want to marry you and now I'm stuck in this afterlife purgatory with you. Just my luck. Anyway, the second story involves a prisoner who was killed during a rough interrogation, and he too haunts the inside of the building by banging on the bars and throwing papers about. Now the second building is Delaney Hall in Schreiner University. From its name you can probably guess that it's a dorm building at the university and it's haunted by 8 former students while living students still reside there. The students see doors slamming when the ghosts have fights with one another, and construction workers constantly complain about how their tools go missing because of the ghosts. And finally, at number 1 is Saratoga, Texas. The Light of Saratoga is the legend of mysterious lights appearing and disappearing on Bragg Road that all residents know. The road runs between Beaumont and Livingston and is next to the ghost town of Bragg Station. A haunted road and a ghost town? What a match made in heaven. So strange lights on roads have been featured in many other videos, so this phenomenon is nothing new. Some think it's simply swamp gas, but the most popular story behind it is that a railroad worker was decapitated during a railway accident, and the light comes from the lantern his ghost carries as he looks for his head. Honestly, if he survived this long without his head, I don't really think he needs it. The second explanation for the lights is a ghostly couple. It said the newlyweds were on their way home on the road when they were stopped by an innocent looking man on the side of the road. However, the man was not innocent at all. He had a gun and a knife and took the man's wife hostage into big thicket forest and killed her there and then disappeared. The man was ordered to wait in the car till they disappeared, otherwise he'd shoot her. He waited and then ran into the forest trying to follow their sounds, but he was too late. So it said the lights on the road are him trying to find his bride's murderer. Love never dies, you guys. Your fiance may be murdered, but your love never dies.
Starting off this countdown, we have Ruby, Arizona. Established in 1910, Ruby used to be a popular mining town. Now it's a popular and well-preserved ghost town. The population of this area started off small, but over the years it gradually increased. At its peak, it had a population of about 1,200 residents. Now, since the population number was so small, they really didn't have a proper law enforcement system. In fact, a lot of families were scared to live there. Between 1920 to 1922, Ruby and the surrounding area was the scene of 3 double homicides, known as the Ruby Murders. In 1920, 2 brothers were found shot in their store. One with a bullet in his head and his back, the other brother had been shot through his left eye. Then in 1921, the store's new owner was attacked, killed, and their store was robbed. Then in 1940, the mine closed down, and the next year the town was pretty much abandoned. Coming in at number 9, we have New Idria, California. New Idria was once another popular mining area. However, over the years, mercury has been seeping into the water and ground, contaminating it. It's considered way too toxic for people to live there. On top of the mercury problem, they also have an asbestos problem. So yeah, EPA declared it not a safe area to be in, let alone live in. In our 8th spot, we have Tawerga, Libya. Back in 2011, residents of this town were forced to leave by resistance forces. Buildings were burnt and ransacked, and people's possessions were thrown about, littering the streets. There once was 30,000 people living there. Now it's home to no one, and the residents are never allowed to return home. This is one of the places you literally can't visit. The whole area is defended by a small military. You probably will be killed if you try to visit this area. Also, good luck finding it. Its main road is now erased from road signs, and there's no directional arrows telling you where to go. All that's left of this place are destroyed homes and lone cats and dogs. Moving on at number 7, we have Pyramiden, Norway. or as it is now called, the Soviet ghost town in the Arctic Circle. So way up in the Arctic Circle is Pyramiden. Probably said that wrong, I apologize. A once popular mining town. During World War II, this mining town was very successful. However, it fell following the downfall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Then the town was the site of a tragic accident. A plane crashed in the area, killing some of the residents. After that incident, the town could no longer support its residents, and by 1998, it was deserted. Nowadays, thanks to the cold climate, the town is pretty much preserved. The buildings are still in place. Nowadays, thanks to the cold climate, the town is pretty much preserved. The buildings are still in place, and homes look like they are ready to welcome families back. But no one wants to step foot in an area where such a big tragedy occurred. In our 6th spot, we have Ujiapu. Referred to as China's Manhattan, Ujiapu was created to be a center for world trade and finance. But more than 22 buildings are still unfinished, and there's no citizens working inside the big tall buildings. A cab driver described the area as being completely empty, and he says it's 10 times creepier at night. There's a bunch of brightly lit roads, but no one is driving on them. He claims that one time he was driving down the road when he saw headlights coming towards his car, as if a car was going to crash into him head on. He braced for impact, but nothing hit him. When he looked back, there was nothing there. So what were the lights that he saw? He has no idea, but now he thinks that the area is haunted. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Forlandia, Brazil. In 1927, Henry Ford thought it would be a good idea to create a massive rubber plantation in the jungles of Brazil. He named it Fordlandia. He designed the town to have swimming pools, a golf course, and bungalows. He hoped to get a lot of rubber from the trees of the Amazon for car tires and such. But unfortunately, his whole plan failed. The trees ended up getting a leaf fungus, and then they died. Then his team and him kept getting into multiple disputes with the Brazilian laborers. So in 1945, he canceled the plans and sold it to the Brazilian government. All that remains are a couple of structures overgrown by nature. In our 4th spot, we have Pitcher, Oklahoma. Pitcher, Oklahoma was once a popular lead and zinc mining town. In fact, it was home to a number of families. But in the mid-90s, a third of the younger population suffered from lead poisoning, and they were experiencing cognitive issues, but they kind of just ignored that and continued living there until 2006. That's when it was discovered that 80% of the buildings were pretty much going to collapse at any time. In fact, one motorist died after driving into a huge hole in the ground. After they discovered that, the population dropped to only 20 people. People fled like crazy. They got the heck out of there. In our 3rd spot, we have Sanchi Pod City. Located just outside of New Taipei, this city is filled with pretty weird styled homes. These homes literally look like UFO pods stacked on top of each other. In fact, it has been nicknamed the UFO houses. So construction of the city began in 1978, and it was meant to be like a vacation resort area. But a lot of bad things happened in the area, which stopped construction. Several fatal car accidents occurred near the construction sites, and then they lost a lot of investments, so the whole thing just came tumbling down. Now it's said that the area is cursed with bad luck. This is because they bisected a Chinese dragon statue near the front gates. By doing so, it's bad luck, and that's why the project was never finished. In our 2nd spot, we have Kentubek, Uzbekistan, otherwise known as Asbestos Island. This area was where biological weapons were being tested out. One of the labs there worked with smallpox and the bubonic plague. In 1971, 10 people on the island contracted smallpox, and 3 died as a result of the testings. Then in 1988, when they banned biological weapons, they buried tons of anthrax spores in the area. In fact, it was considered the world's largest anthrax dumping grounds. Over the years, there have been attempts to decontaminate the area, but they still believe it's way too hazardous to live there. As a result, it lays abandoned. And in our number 1 spot, we have Ipetuan, Argentina. Ipetuan was once known as a perfect spa destination with its therapeutic thermal waters. In fact, since the lake was so rich in minerals, it was used to treat certain skin conditions, muscle pain, joint inflammation, and diabetes. But sadly, the area was hit hard with a bunch of rainstorms and floods. Following this, a dam broke which was protecting the area, and tons of water poured in. Residents said that they woke up to ankle-deep water in their home. The water level rose a centimeter each hour. 2 weeks later, it was 3 meters deep. By 1993, it was 10 meters deep. The village became uninhabitable and abandoned. It's said that the residents never fully recovered from the trauma of losing everything literally overnight. It's so sad. Now there are attempts to rebuild the area, but chances are nobody is going to move back to an area where the same thing could happen again.